Have you ever stopped and asked yourself why? Not what you need to fix, not what you need to do differently, but why, beneath all the effort and all the striving, there is still this quiet ache that refuses to leave. Most people never ask that question. They assume the ache means something is wrong with them. They push harder, they plan more carefully, they try to control more tightly, and for a while it almost works. Life feels manageable. The anxiety quiets just enough to be bearable, but it never fully dissolves, because the source of the suffering has not been touched. Only its surface has been smoothed over again and again until smoothing becomes a way of life. And exhaustion becomes the water you swim in without noticing. There is a different way, not a louder way, not a more ambitious way, but a quieter one. A way that has been walked for thousands of years by those who understood something that modern life rarely teaches, that the struggle is not with the world outside, but with the grip inside. The grip of wanting things to be other than they are. The grip of needing to hold what cannot be held. The grip of believing that if you just control enough, plan enough, resist enough, life will finally relent and give you peace. It will not. Peace does not come from winning that fight. It comes from setting it down. If something in these words has already begun to soften something in your chest, stay with this. Subscribe and let this be a place you return to. Not for answers, but for the kind of stillness that reminds you that you are never as lost as the noise made you believe. What follows is not a prescription. It is not a list of things to accomplish. Think of it instead as a slow walk beside a river. And the river, as the old teachers always said, already knows the way. The first thing worth understanding is what detachment actually is, because almost everything you have heard about it is wrong. Detachment is not coldness. It is not indifference. It is not the practiced emotional distance of someone who has simply stopped caring to protect themselves from being hurt again. That is not freedom, that is armor, and armor is heavy. True detachment, the kind that Buddhist wisdom has pointed toward for centuries, is something far more tender than that. It is the willingness to love fully, to engage completely, to be present with your whole heart, while releasing the invisible fist that says this must stay, this must not change, this must remain exactly as it is, or I will not survive. Think of a craftsman who spent years making a single clay vessel. He shaped it with his hands, fired it with patience, carried it with care, and one morning it fell and shattered. His student expected grief. Instead, the craftsman smiled, not with cruelty, not with performance, but with a quiet that went all the way down, because somewhere in the making of that vessel he had already understood. It was never truly his. It came from the earth, and it returned to the earth, and his hands had only been the instrument of its temporary form. This is what the teaching on impermanence actually means, when it is lived rather than merely recited. Everything you live, every relationship, every role, every version of yourself you have grown attached to, is more like weather than like stone. It passes, not because life is cruel, but because passage is the very nature of things. The suffering does not come from the passing, it comes from the clenching, from trying to hold water in a closed fist. Notice what happens in your body when you truly consider letting something go. Not abandoning it, not destroying it, but loosening your grip around it. The shoulders drop just slightly. The breath finds a little more room. That loosening is not weakness. It is the beginning of a different kind of strength. One that does not exhaust itself fighting what was never meant to be stopped. And once that loosening begins, something else becomes possible. Acceptance, not the passive, defeated kind that people sometimes confuse with giving up, but a radical, clear-eyed willingness to see things as they actually are, rather than as you desperately need them to be. Imagine standing at the edge of the ocean. A wave is coming, enormous, relentless, indifferent to your plans. You have two choices. You can plant your feet, tighten your body, and throw your fists into the water. The wave does not care. It will move through you regardless, and the only one left breathless and battered will be you. Or you can dive beneath it. Let its force pass over you. Rise on the other side, lungs full, still standing. The wave did not change. The ocean did not negotiate, but your relationship to it transformed everything about what happened next. This is what acceptance looks like in practice. Not the removal of difficulty, but a fundamental shift in how you meet it. An archer does not fight the wind. He reads it. He adjusts his stance, his breath, the angle of his arm, and he releases. The wind is still there. But now it is information rather than enemy. Most suffering is not caused by what happens. It is caused by the argument with what happens. The relentless internal insistence that this should not be occurring, that life has made an error, that reality owes you a correction. Reality never corrects itself to match our insistence, but something in us can learn to stop insisting. And in that stopping, a space opens, clear, unhurried, surprisingly alive. Closely related to acceptance is something even subtler, learning to trust what you cannot yet see. The mind is impatient. It wants to know now whether this loss is permanent, whether this difficulty will resolve, whether the story it is living has a good ending or a devastating one. And when it cannot know, it fills the gap with fear. It constructs elaborate worst-case scenarios, rehearses disasters that have not yet occurred, and then lives inside those disasters as though they were already real. The body tightens, the chest narrows, and all of this suffering happens in response to a future that exists only in imagination. There is an old story of a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors gathered at the fence and said, "What terrible luck." The farmer replied simply, "Perhaps." The next morning the horse returned with 7 wild horses following it. The neighbors returned, "What extraordinary luck." The farmer said only, "Perhaps." Later that week the farmer's son broke his leg, trying to tame one of the wild horses. The neighbors came again. "How unfortunate." "Perhaps," said the farmer. Days after that, soldiers came through the village to conscript young men for war. They passed over the farmer's son because of his broken leg. And the neighbors, once more, came to the fence. The story is not about passivity. It is not a suggestion to stop caring about outcomes. It is something quieter and more precise. A reminder that our vision is always partial. What looks like a closed door from the inside is sometimes a corridor. What feels like loss is sometimes the slow clearing of space. A butterfly struggles against its own cocoon because that struggle is what builds the strength in its wings. Pulled out too early, with well-meaning hands that want only to help, it never learns to fly. There are things in your life right now that feel like they are taking too long, like something that should already be resolved is still unresolved, like you are waiting for a season that refuses to arrive. And the waiting feels like evidence of something wrong. It is not. Some things ripen only in their own time, and no amount of watching the fruit will make it ready before it is ready. If you have found something settling in you as you read this, some small release, some quiet recognition, let this be an invitation to stay. Subscribe and let these reflections accompany you. Not to change your life overnight, but to gently, persistently shift the ground beneath your feet. When the mind cannot trust time, it turns to its oldest strategy, control. And this is where so much of the deepest exhaustion lives, not in the work itself, but in the constant invisible labor of trying to manage outcomes that were never fully manageable. Careers, reputations, other people's perceptions, the body's aging, the unpredictable movements of relationships. We build elaborate systems of behavior designed to keep these things in order. And when they slip out of order, as they inevitably do, the system requires maintenance, more planning, more vigilance, more anxiety disguised as preparation. There is a man on the edge of a cliff who has been holding on for so long that he has forgotten he is holding on. His arms ache, his hands have gone numb, every ounce of his energy is devoted to not falling. And what he does not know, what no one has told him because he has been too afraid to look, is that the solid ground is only a few feet below. Not an abyss, not a catastrophe, just the earth. Firm, ordinary, waiting. Letting go of control does not mean letting go of responsibility. It does not mean becoming careless or passive or detached from the outcomes of your choices. It means recognizing with honesty and a certain courage the difference between what you can genuinely influence and what you are only exhausting yourself pretending to manage. You can give your best effort, you can act with integrity, you can show up with full presence and real care. And the result, the actual final result, will be shaped by 100 forces you will never fully see. The teacher who said something to someone who said something to someone else, the timing of a storm, the accumulated mood of a room you walked into on a particular afternoon. You are one thread in a very large weave, and recognizing this is not defeat. It is a relief so profound that it sometimes comes out as tears before it comes out as anything that looks like peace. What arises when you stop clenching around the outcome is not emptiness, it is attention, real attention available for the first time in a long time, no longer rationed out across a dozen imagined futures. The mind comes home. And a mind that has come home can finally do the one thing that relentless control never could. It can be still enough to see clearly. But seeing clearly requires one more thing. It requires softening the harshest voice in the room. And for most people, that voice is internal. The way you speak to yourself when you have made a mistake. The way you interpret your own exhaustion, your own confusion, your own inability to immediately correct every imperfection. Buddhist wisdom on compassion almost always begins here. Not with grand gestures towards strangers, but with a simple, radical willingness to stop punishing yourself for being human. Consider a bird that has fallen. It lies on the ground, one wing bent, dazed. Imagine if it began to break its own remaining wing in punishment for having fallen. It would never fly again, not because the fall was irreparable, but because the punishment finished what the fall began. This is what relentless self-criticism does. It does not motivate, it does not sharpen. Over time, it simply wears down the very thing that needs to heal, until healing starts to feel impossible, and impossibility starts to feel like truth. And then there is the other weight, the resentment you carry toward those who have hurt you. The grievances replayed in the quiet hours, the stories told and retold, the brasa, that hot coal you have been holding, waiting for the right moment to throw it at someone who may not even know you are still holding it. But the burning is in your hand. The exhaustion is in your grip. The sack of stones you carry in the name of justified anger weighs on your back, not theirs. This is not a call to pretend that harm did not happen. It happened. It was real. And you are allowed to feel every weight of it. What Buddhist wisdom on forgiveness invites is simply the recognition that continuing to carry the weight is a choice, and that you are allowed to set it down. Not for them. For the life that is waiting for you on the other side of that particular heaviness. Most people who have hurt us were themselves operating from pain, from confusion, from a limited understanding of their own actions and their own wounds. This does not excuse what they did. It simply makes them human. And that recognition that they too were suffering is sometimes the loosening that finally allows the grip to release. Sit with one person you are still carrying a weight toward. Do not try to forgive them today. That is too much to ask all at once. Simply notice what you feel in your body when you bring them to mind. Where does the tightness live? The chest, the jaw, the hands? Just notice. That awareness, gentle, honest, uncritical, is already the beginning of something. It is the first breath of a longer exhale. All of these teachings point toward the same shore. Not a shore of perfection, not a shore where nothing ever hurts, but a shore where you are no longer fighting the river on the way there. The river of your life has been moving since before you understood what a river was. It has moved through seasons of loss and seasons of grace, through stretches of calm and stretches of white water, through mornings of clarity and nights of bewildering fog. And through all of it, the river has continued. Not because you controlled it, not because you held it in place, but because that is what rivers do. The peace that the old teachers spoke of is not a distant destination. It is not earned by suffering enough or understanding enough or letting go of enough at once. It is available here in the ordinary texture of a Tuesday afternoon, in the breath that is happening right now without your management, in the way your hands rest in your lap when they finally stop reaching for something to fix. You do not need to arrive anywhere to find it. You only need to stop arguing with where you already are. These reflections are not demands. They are not a new way to measure yourself and fall short. Think of them as a hand extended on a long walk, not pulling you forward, not pushing you along, simply present. The pace is yours, the path is yours. All that is being offered is company and perhaps a slightly gentler way of seeing what has always been here. May you hold what you love with open hands. May you meet what changes without losing yourself. May you find in the stillness beneath all the noise that the ground was always there. And it has always been enough. If this walk has meant something to you, subscribe and let it continue. One quiet breath, one gentle teaching, one ordinary moment of presence at a time.